right. Sorry. Okay, all righty. Man, Duracell must make bank on the U of A. Every one of these little microphones, all of our batteries that they give us are Duracell. So there must be some kind of secret agreement. Or maybe it's not secret. Okay, so what am I doing? I'm talking about mental health. Okay. Breathe in, breathe out. Sip Purloin Diet Coke. Okay, all good. So, we were talking last time about this body of Springtide Institute research on young people, right? On Americans 13 to 25 that they did in 2019, right? So predating COVID. And already there, the findings showed that Gen Z was America's loneliest generation. So we're going through some of the numbers last time, and that is what we are going to continue to do here. Before I do that, I'm just going to say one little thing. I spent most of the day today with appointments reviewing people's exams from this class and other classes. I think most of my slots are filled right now. I just finished marking everything for every class that I have. So, you know, rather than basking in the glory of having nothing to do, I'm going to open some more slots. So if you do want to come and see your exam, just keep an eye on my appointment booking link on Canvas. I will add some times. I just have to figure out when they are. And there'll be a few more times that you can come in and take a look, probably on Monday and Tuesday of next week. And then I don't know for the week after. I have to think about it still. So if you do want to review midterm number 2, you know, do keep an eye on that and book a time. And I will open some additional times to give people a little bit more of a chance. Okay, social isolation. We ended off on this slide, right, and these numbers, right, where we see pretty consistently that, you know, 1 in 10 young people, you know, feel like they have nobody to talk to, left out. People are around them, but not with them, right? They are alone together with people, or they feel isolated from others always. You know, 1 in 10 is always. And then, you know, better than a third for most of these numbers is always or sometimes together. Okay. So, what is their life like in terms of their interactions with people that they find meaningful, right? So meaningful interactions in a day. So about 2/3, right, of the people surveyed said they had 3 or fewer meaningful interactions in a day. Now again, about 1 in 10, right, so 10%, so 1 out of every 10 young people you would have met in this age group in 2019 said that they had zero interactions, roughly, I guess 9% of the sample. We could say about 1 in 10. And then, you know, a big chunk, 57%, or over half the sample, said it was 1 to 3. Now, 1 to 3 is a wide range, right? 1 would definitely be not a lot, and 3 might be okay. But still, that's not a lot of meaningful interactions. About 20%, right? So 1 in 5 said that they had 4 to 5 meaningful interactions per day. And then, you know, a solid 14% said they had 5 plus, so lots of meaningful interactions in a day. So, nearly 40% feel no one knows them, always or sometimes. And kind of as I was talking, earlier, and as we sort of touched on in the religion unit, feeling known is a key for Gen Z in terms of feeling like they belong, right? They belong with people, but there's a solid chunk of them that aren't interacting on a daily basis with all that many people in a meaningful way. Okay. Why did I animate the title on this slide but no others? I don't know. For fun, I guess. So, kind of some of the questions that they asked, it's a little bit revealing. So, 58% of the young people in this sample said they feel stressed out or overwhelmed overall, right? 2/3 of them said they don't feel like they have enough time to get everything done. We kind of saw that, right, earlier in the course. I know it probably seems weird to talk about it here, but we talked about hookup culture, right? Young people were stressed and busy, so hooking up seemed like a way of just kind of getting, that young adult sex portion of their lives done in a quick and, I don't want to say effortless, but a quick way that got it out of the way because they were really busy and they're stressed out, right? So 2/3 of them say they're stressed, like they don't feel like they have enough time to get everything done. They're just really, really busy. Okay, 60% said they feel fatigued or tired even when they wake up after an adequate sleep. And half of them, over half of them, I guess, have a hard time relaxing. Now here, I think this number is telling as well. About a third, right? 1 in 3 young people reported having no one to turn to when they're stressed. So they are alone in that stress, right? They feel very lonely when they are stressed out. They don't know how to handle it and they don't know who to turn to when they are feeling stressed. Okay. So out of this same study, right, they sort of reported numbers on young people's trust in institutions. And here, right, what you see is them rating their trust in institutions on a 1 to 10 scale, right? And this is the median score for those 1,000 people. So nonprofit organizations do best, right, at about a 5.3, right? So they're trusted just a little bit over kind of the halfway mark. Nobody does better than that. Public schools are straight 50-50, as are banks. Clearly people do not know enough bankers. As financial institutions go, banks are pretty scuzzy. Organized religion, comes in below the 50% mark, and then the media, the presidency, and Congress, right? Keep in mind this is 2019. That's El Trumpo the first. That's kind of towards the end of his first term, but before COVID, right? So presidency and Congress, no one should trust politicians ever. And big business, right, had a pretty low ranking of trust. And you can see kind of the shift in levels of trust that's gone on, since the 1970s, from 1970 to 2019, right? Trust in businesses was never all that high, right? It's down a little bit, but not all that high. Trust in the medical system, right, had sort of cratered. And this is really interesting, right? Because again, this is 36% saying they trust the medical system, and that's prior to COVID, right? I can't imagine what happened to that number during COVID. The presidency, right, in 1970, okay, that was before Nixon, dropped down to just a little over a third. TV news, never all that trusted either, but even less trusted now, and on, right? And organized religion, right, used to be more trusted than it is today, as are public schools, right? So trust in institutions amongst Gen Z is way lower than trust in institutions was for other generational cohorts, right? So it has dropped pretty substantially. Okay, I just want to see if no questions. Okay, so for the Springtide data, and I apologize for how crappy this image is. I've never been able to find like a PDF of this that worked, that I could screen cap, so I had to take a picture out of an actual book. But I think you'll kind of get the picture. Okay, so what helps? Well, let's talk a little bit about trusted adults in the lives of young people. Now, I know like this is a pretty wide range of young people, right? 13 to 25, right? So you've got relatively young teenagers all the way to emerging adults that have kind of probably, for the most part, come out of university, college, and are entering their working years, right? So there's a lot of things going on. However, one thing that I think is really clear in this data, and it's something that Christian Smith talks about in, I think it's in Souls in Transition, right, which is the second book in the National Study of Youth and Religion, or maybe Lives in Transition. There's two books that were published about the same time, and I always get them mixed up. They're both authored by Christian Smith, so it's all good. Is we tend to think of like, teenagers, and especially as they move into those emerging adult years, as no longer really needing mentorship, right? They are young adults, emerging adults, whatever you want to kind of, however you want to phrase it. What Christian Smith says in his work on young adults that are going through this transition from, adolescence into emerging adulthood is it's actually a time of life when they need a lot of mentorship and they typically don't get a lot of it. Now, why? Typically, they're moving through some of the toughest life choices that they have to make. Choices about sexuality, about relationships, about careers, learning things like how to stand on their own 2 feet, pay their own bills, right? Get insurance, fix stuff, right, in their houses that break. There's a lot of really hard stuff that needs to be learned in this period. But as a society, right, when someone turns 18, in a lot of cases, we sort of consider, it's like, I have to put my pen down, human complete, off we go to the races, right? They're done. They're an adult now, and parents and mentors' jobs have kind of ended, right? And what Smith says is that this just isn't the case, right? Actually, in this 13 to 25 year age range, people still need a lot of mentorship. They can offer mentorship, right, to people who are younger than them, especially when they're here, but they also need a lot of advice, learning how to step through life exactly at the period where society tends to pull a lot of that mentorship back. Okay, now to illustrate this in particularly, I think, graphic terms, because there's graphics right here. Sorry, that's a terrible joke, which I should not have made. I apologize. Okay, so what do we have here? Basically, these are our stress factors that we were talking about a few slides ago, right? In red, I feel completely alone. In teal or green, I need my daughter to be here to tell me what color that is. Well, I'm going to say green, no one understands me. Yellow, I feel left out. And other red, I feel stressed and overwhelmed, right? What do we see? Well, trusted adults make a big difference in decreasing feelings of loneliness, isolation, and stress, right? So at the very most dramatic, right, we look at our young people that say that they have 0 trusted adults in their lives. 62% of them say they feel completely alone. 70% say that no one understands them. 59% say they feel left out. And 73 say they feel stressed or overwhelmed. Now, even, one trusted adult makes that a lot better, right? That number for feeling completely alone drops to from 62 to 46%. For no one understands me, it drops by 10 points to 60. For I feel left out drops 7 points to 52, and I feel stressed or overwhelmed drops to 68. But of course, the more adults you add, the better these numbers get. And of course, the best is at our 5+ adults, or trusted adults, right? 9% feel completely alone, which makes sense, right? They have at least 5 or more trusted adults. Only 24, like a quarter of them, feel that no one understands them. Just over a fifth say they feel left out, and just about 40% say they feel stressed or overwhelmed, which is a really big difference over those other categories, right? So, relationships with trusted adults for young people seem to be that magic that reduces stress, anxiety to large extents and makes it a lot more manageable. Okay. Now, remember, and this actually works well because I skipped over one unit and went right to this from religion. Remember those 9 cultural factors, right? And there was this one I talked about, network closure, right? Which is about how surrounded young people are with adults that care about them and are communicating with each other. In essence, this is what the trusted adults thing is about. And if you remember, right, the devoted in the National Study of Youth and Religion had many more adults other than their parents that they trusted enough to talk about things with, right? That is exactly what's going on here, right? So if we want to talk about better life outcomes, this is better life outcomes. I'm going to change colors so I can really stress. This, when we're talking about stress, is a better life outcome than this, right? That's happier teenagers and emerging adults that are doing better, that are navigating life more seamlessly than their peers who have fewer trusted adults. So, largely, I think, validating those findings from the National Study of Youth and Religion, what we have here is the more adults a young person has that they trust and feel they can talk to, the better they're going to be moving through a lot of life's challenges. Okay, and I mean, this is just, right, the same information, but on a different chart, and showing the difference between that 0 trusted adults and, 5 or more trusted adults, right? These huge gaps, right? 50%. I guess technically 51%. Or no, I guess it's not quite that. I can do math. For some reason I read that as 75. Anyway, what is that? I can't do math. My brain is so dead from meeting with you. I'm going to stop now. All right, you see the big gap. Huge gaps in these numbers, right? And this one especially, right? Only 9% that have 5 or more trusted adults saying they feel completely alone, which again, not surprising. They don't suffer from severe loneliness as much. Okay. Are you all sufficiently depressed now? Feeling alone, reflecting on your lives? Don't worry, I'm about to make it so much worse. So let's keep talking. All right, moving on from that Springtide study, we're going to look at some other pieces of data. So, a 2021 study of adolescent mental health led by my favorite generational researcher and only psychology professor who I consider worth my time, Jean Twenge. My favorite and yours, I'm sure, did this study of adolescent mental health and found that adolescent mental health was declining worldwide, right? All over the world. Okay, so it's not just America. And here, the reason this is important is sometimes people will sort of use to use some internet parlance, cope. That it's just that America is such a messed up society, right? With gun violence and Trump and all of these things. But no, these things are happening worldwide. It's not just the United States. Now, the other thing, it began well prior to COVID, right? COVID made it a heck of a lot worse And we're starting to see the reversal of those COVID effects, right? It got really bad during COVID, and that effect took a while to work itself through. We're now seeing broad improvements back to kind of the pre-COVID baseline, but it's still bad. And it's affected both males and females, but it's been more pronounced in girls than it has been in boys. Okay, might be related, and I think probably is, to general declines in time spent with other people, doing pro-social activities outside of the home, and generally, you know that as a professor, you bang on one theme too much when you teach students in multiple other classes, and they know what your trigger words are so much that they just like reuse it in answers on other exams. Deinstitutionalization, right? This is one of my big things, right? The fact that young people now are so deinstitutionalized, they're not largely part of institutional life in major ways, and that they spend more of their time on social media, and I'll say screens in general, and I'll do my old man yells at clouds thing about screen cultures later when we talk about Jonathan Haidt's work on Gen Z. But screens play a big role in this as well, right? And again, this is all part of a long progression that starts in the 1970s and 80s with Gen X and things like cable TV, and accelerates as we get more screens, and those screens get more and more entertaining. Okay, so this data, so this comes from the Center for Disease Control, right? So the CDC in Atlanta, they run this big social science survey called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. I believe it's run every 2 years on odd years, right? If I understand it correctly. And it's a big survey. It goes back, I think, only to like the mid 2000s. And the data that they published a few years ago kind of collated our 2011 to 2021 data, so a sort of 10-year period. And what does it look like? Well, it looks bad, right? So from 2011, the number of young people that report that they experience persistent feelings of hopelessness and sadness has been going up. Right, a little bit at first, right? It's kind of within the margin of error up to 2017. And then in 2019, it took a big jump. And 2021, right? Now we're talking, the virus of unspecified origin, so COVID right there. 42, jumped again, a big number. You can maybe explain away that 42% as a COVID effect, but something was definitely, a big jump from 2017 to 2019. This question, they just started asking in 2021, but, nearly 30% said they were experiencing poor mental health. Seriously considered attempting suicide, right? You see stability more or less here, a bit of a jump here, and a big jump in 2021. Made a suicide plan, that's a big red flag there. If someone actually makes a plan, it's much more serious. That's my red flag. I'm good at art. This pen is not exactly made for art, right? But again, you see pretty stable numbers, about 13, 14, 15, 14, and then a bit of a jump and a further jump in 2021. Suicide attempts, pretty stable again until 2021. A little bit of variance, and were injured in a suicide attempt that had to be treated by a doctor or a nurse. That one, not that many, and it's basically flat. Okay. So, what do we have here? Same thing, CDC report coming out of that Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Percentage of female and male students who experience persistent feelings of sadness. So now we've got those same numbers split by gender, right? And what do you see? Well, girls have experienced a much bigger jump both in just like percentage and in just total like raw numbers than boys, right? And it had been going up pretty steadily until 2021 when it really jumped for girls, right? And for boys, it went up as well. It just started from a lower base and it, jumped up less in terms of percentages. So girls, both bad trends, but girls definitely leading the way in terms of feelings of, persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. Okay. Percentage of males and female students who seriously consider attempting suicide. Basically, boys are unchanged, right? Boys are just as likely to have considered attempting suicide in 2011 as they were in 2021, right? A 1% change is margin of error. For girls, it's a slow kind of gentle increase until, again, 2021 when it really, really jumps. But again, big jump for girls. The chart. I love this chart. So this one was put together by Zach Rausch, who works with both Jean Twenge and Jonathan Haidt. Talk about Jonathan a little bit later. On Jonathan Haidt's blog, or Substack, I don't know. Is a Substack a blog? It's a good one, and it's free. It's called After Babel. And it's worth a follow if you're interested in kind of questions about young people, and especially about young people's mental health. By the way, you will not like this, but one of the recent things that Jonathan's been going on about and has presented increasing amounts of evidence is that in order to help young people learn better, we should take away all your laptops and tablets. Yeah. There's an increasing body of evidence from places that have banned laptops and tablets that it really, really helps with learning, and that tablets and laptops are Jasmine, your face. That laptops and tablets are actually quite detrimental to young people's learning. So if you loved, the province of Alberta banning smartphones from classrooms, you're going to love the follow-up. I guess you're not in high school or junior high anymore, but the follow-up is going to be they're eventually going to ban tablets and laptops. And I can see this coming because, the evidence is pretty solid. Okay, so what does this show? Average time spent with friends in minutes. So if you want to talk about those persistent feelings of loneliness, probably no single kind of chart explains that better than this one. If we go back to the jolly, jolly year of 2003, in prehistory when dinosaurs still roamed the earth, or something, I don't know if it's not particularly relevant, but this is the year I met my wife. So, back in the heady days, when I myself was in my undergraduate degree, young people were spending on average somewhere around 155 minutes a day with friends, right? So that's your teenagers and emerging adults, right? Because you got your 15 to 24 kind of cohort. Now, older adults, right? 25 to 34, 45 to 54, 35 to 44 is here. Oh, weird mixes. 55 to 64 and 65, right? They all spend less time with friends, which makes sense, right? They're all busy with work. They work more. They have families. They're going to spend less time with friends. It's somewhere on average, starting out at around 40 minutes a day, and then it really drops for everybody. Obviously, this is, during COVID, but it had been dropping for everybody before COVID as well. But the biggest drop is obviously for our youngest cohort, right? Our 15 to 24s, where it went from 155 minutes, down just prior to COVID to about 65, 70 minutes per day, right? Or roughly half. Spending about half as much time with their peers as they did in the past. That's a really terrible half. I'm going to try that again. 1 out of 2, half, there we go. Better. Now, of course, this declines even more during COVID, but what you see is that decline, the really sharp decline started well before, but the big decline starts here, 2012. Yeah. It's face-to-face time. Yeah, it's in person. Yeah, that's a good question. Anyone care to take a crack at why there's a big gray line on 2012? Anyone curious enough to make a guess? Because this is the dividing line, right? Where the data bumps around a bit, it recovers, but after that, it's just a straight downward trajectory. What happens in 2012? All right, you're all too afraid to face me in glorious combat. So the iPhone comes out in 2007. 2012 is the year that the majority of teenagers and emerging adults own a smartphone, right? So this is the dividing line, before iPhone and after iPhone, right? We should mark history. Get rid of BC and AD, and we'll mark history as before the iPhone and after the iPhone from now on. Come on, BIP is a way better way of marking time than BC. Okay, so, right, that's the dividing line, after which time with friends just tanks, right? And it tanks for every cohort, right? You see everybody, even is going down. We're spending less time together. But it's especially marked for young people, because young people were spending the most time with friends, which makes sense, right? They have the most free time, they're in school, and all of those things, and it tanks really strongly for them. Okay. And as you see, all of these charts have a big, stinky black line in 2012 for exactly the same reason. And what do we see? So, prevalence of anxiety, right? Again, we see, other than the old, right, age 50 and above, they actually do okay. They see a 7% decrease. Everybody else sees an increase in anxiety since 2010, but obviously the biggest one is our 18 to 25s, right? Where they see, virtually a doubling of their markers of anxiety or prevalence of anxiety since 2010. Same thing with US undergrads being diagnosed with a mental illness, right? Anxiety and depression skyrocket. ADHD, right? Coming up, which, I think maybe lends something to the notion that our technologies just have messed with our attention in pretty substantive ways, right? If you go all media studies on it, Marshall McLuhan's The Medium is the Message. Well, the smartphone's message is pay attention to a million things at once all the time, right? Which maybe is increasing ADHD. Could be differences in diagnoses too, although, I think there's reasons to question that as well. Okay, anxiety, depression have skyrocketed, right, since 2010, but especially sharply since 2012, right? Right around the time that people start spending less time with each other. Strange. All right, these charts are real small. I'm trying to fit too much in on a slide sometimes, and it turns out about like this. Okay, US teens admitted to hospitals for non-fatal self-harm, ages 15 to 19, and actual suicides age 15 to 19. So we see, again, a big jump, 48% increase for girls 15 to 19, 37% increase for boys. Actual suicides, right? Boys up 34%, girls up 82%. Boys still way ahead. And if you're curious for grim statistics, the reason boys commit suicide more, even though girls are admitted more to hospital for non-fatal self-harm, which often is suicide attempts, is because the methods that boys choose for taking their own lives tend to be more fatal than the ones girls choose. Boys are more likely, especially in the US, to choose guns. Girls are more likely to choose pills, and pills are a much less effective way of ending your own life. Not that I'm giving advice. Just FYI, that's why those statistics look the way they do. All right, US teens in the 10 to 14 range admitted for non-fatal self-harm, right? Girls, and this is cases per 100,000, or instances per 100,000 or rate per 100,000. What we see, right, it jumps from under 200 for girls to about 450 cases per 100,000, right? So a pretty large jump. For boys, the number doesn't jump nearly as much for non-fatal self-harm, but you can see, the suicide rate, 10 to 14, jumps quite a bit. Now, the number of them is still quite low, right? It's about 3.5 per 100,000 people, but still, right? It jumps significantly. Okay, so yeah, a bigger increase in suicides for females, but males started from a higher point. Okay, now, I haven't seen that. Do I know why there was an increase in time spent with friends in 2010? I mean, some of this is, let me go back to this slide because it's a good question. Some of this is going to be just the way the statistics are collected, right? In normal sociological data, you're going to see kind of bumps up and down, right? Because your cohorts are going to be a little bit different. Life circumstances are going to be a bit different. Even randomly selected populations, right? There's always, a normal sociological kind of survey when you chart it out like this is going to be bumpy. There's going to be ups and downs and like a sharp line. It's never kind of flat, or the rates are not generally consistent, right? So for whatever reason, that cohort that year, or that kind of cross-section, had a little bit more time spent with friends. There's no real reason other than probably that just is a weird quirk of social science research. Okay. I make no promises because if I have time, I'll slot it in at the end. It only takes like one class. I just increasingly don't like it. And I've trimmed it down so much that it's not my favorite anymore. Okay. What's the difference in time spent with friends in person and online through games or something? Is spending time together, does it only have benefits if it's in person? Sorry, that last one is wrong. Okay, let me answer these in order. The difference seems to be actually rather marked, right? Spending time with people in person versus spending time with people online, the two aren't equivalent, right? And it's probably down to our dumb animal brain, right? Because you still have the same brain as the first human beings who, roamed, the African plains, what is it, like 100,000 years ago or whatever, when modern humans emerged, right? Your brain is largely unchanged. And those were people that spent time in groups and for whom social isolation probably meant getting eaten by a large predator, or a group of smaller but still equally annoying predators like hyenas, right? So social isolation and not seeing people face to face was a huge problem. So humans have a really strong social urge to be with people a lot, right? We're really tribal animals at the end of the day. And so spending time with people virtually doesn't seem to have those same benefits, right? You don't get the same things like dopamine releases of oxytocin, and all of those kind of hormones that help you bond with people and reduce stress, right? So yeah, it has more benefits, let's say, if you're in person. People thought that the world was coming to an end in 2012. Was that the Mayan calendar thing? I don't think that was a widely shared assumption. So I'm going to go with no. I'm going to go with no. I was under the assumption that people may be slightly less lonely currently because social media makes it easier to find your people. I'm going to say I think that's marketing spin, right? That's Facebook largely telling you that social media is such a great thing because it helps you find people just like you, or, you know, I don't know, that hive of scum and villainy, Reddit, you know, making you find, I can't say Reddit ever without calling it a hive of scum and villainy for some reason. That definitely is part of the marketing spin of social media. It just doesn't seem to be the case, right? If anything, people are lonelier than ever, and social media doesn't seem to be a balm for that. But we'll talk about that more. I do have lots more on social media when we get to Jonathan Haidt. Okay. All right, let's talk Canada. So we see similar trends in Canada, right? Younger Canadians, right, are expressing significant declines in mental health. What do we see? And again, going back to 2014, emergence, this is just for Ontario, for girls 13 to 17, right? But Ontario being Canada's largest province, that's probably a pretty good indicator. We see, you know, through the 2000s kind of dropping rates, and then a sharp increase after kind of 2010, 2011. Again, much more so for girls than for boys. Ranking of your mental health, this is an interesting one, right? This is from Canadian Community Health Survey, right? A survey that has data from 2003, in this case till 2019, asking, you know, participants to rate their mental health. And this is Canadian women, this is Canadian men. And what do we see? At the start, right, in 2003, Canadian women, young women in that 15 to 30 age range, rated their mental health better than any of the other cohorts, right? The 31 to 46 and 47 plus. Now, all of them have seen declines in relative ratings of mental health, but that 15 to 30 cohort now rates their, and again, this is self-rated mental health, 29% worse. For men, it's not quite as dramatic, but again, young men started about the same spot as young women, you know, 15 to 30. They went from the top position in this ranking to the lowest, right? They're now lower than the other two cohorts that are kind of gathered here, a 15% decrease. So we see broadly the same thing. And, you know, one of the things we see, a lot more hospitalizations for mental health related outcomes. So girls experience worse mental health, but boys are more likely to act on it. Typically, yes. And when boys act on it, I don't want to say that they're more successful, but I mean, that's the correct word, right? Especially when they attempt to end their own lives, they tend to be more successful because the methods they choose are typically more violent, right? And typically more likely to end your life, sadly. Okay. The UK. Okay, so the UK, we see really similar trends, right? Happiness trends for UK, how am I doing for time? Oh, super good. Happiness trends for UK teens, 10 to 15, right? Again, they kind of started pretty close to older age cohorts, right? They're all kind of clustered together. Oh, sorry, that's boys and girls. Sorry, I read that wrong. Boys and girls, right? Similar trends, but girls have seen a much greater decline in their ratings of happiness than boys, right? Anxiety and depression, same kind of trends, right? Anxiety increasing for both boys and girls, and depression increasing for both boys and girls as well. And self-harm, same kind of trend, big jump kind of following the introduction of social media and smartphones right around in here. We see a big sharp jump, especially for girls, right? We see a much stronger kind of effect from all of these things. And again, we'll talk about why in the subsequent unit, because there are really interesting reasons why this would be the case. Okay, Australia, as if having all of the world's most dangerous animals wasn't enough. Australians have seen the same kind of rates. It's always fun because you can kind of see how different countries here keep statistics when you look at these cross-country statistics, right? Self-poisoning, right? So typically taking pills. Big jump, especially for girls age 15 to 19, though all the other cohorts are up as well. Overnight psychiatric emergency department visits, up 81% for girls 12 to 24. Women 25 plus, somewhat of an increase, 7.7%. Males 25 plus, a 17.1% increase. And males 12 to 24, still a pretty solid 51% increase. Self-harm for hospitalization? No, hospitalization for self-harm. I can speak the English. For Australian females, right, you see again, up overall in the youngest two cohorts, but up much more for 15 to 19-year-olds. And psychological distress, right, way up for females 16 to 24 in Australia. Weirdly, males in Australia in the last little bit of data went a little bit down. Again, that's just sometimes quirks of social science data, but you see a general increase since 2010. So nothing different in Australia. All right, so I can't do this slide in 1 minute. So I'm just gonna put it here and have you look at it for a sec, and then I'm gonna explain it on Friday. No, is it Friday today? On Monday. Shit, I thought it was Wednesday there for a sec. Can we just run another whole class and we'll say it was Friday today? Okay, we'll see you on Monday. We'll talk about this on Monday. Yes, I'm working on it. I'm currently disconnecting the microphone. That's fair. That's where I'd like people to use it. I wish people would come to class.